ESPN expert and friend of the show, Kris Rhim, does not think the Chargers will hit double-digit wins in 2025, and I think he is selling this team short.
You are Locked On Chargers, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Chargers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, and welcome into the Locked On Chargers podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Wade, joined as always by my co-host, David Droegemeier, and we've been covering the Chargers now for 9 seasons, but this is our 7th year as the host of the Locked On Chargers podcast, bringing you your team every day. Thank you to the everydayers out there for making us your first listen. To make sure that you never miss the show, go subscribe or follow for free on the Locked On Chargers YouTube channel and listen wherever you get your podcasts from. David, what do we got today?
Well, Daniel, Kris Rhim does not think that the Chargers got better enough this offseason to be able to eclipse 10 wins, and I'm going to sit here and tell you that I wholeheartedly disagree with that, and I am fully prepared to give you several reasons why I believe that. And also, there's always going to be that kind of sect of fans that are not going to get on that Justin Herbert bandwagon until he wins a playoff game, fair or not, no matter how incredibly talented we know that Justin Herbert is. And is there any possibility that the Chargers have 2 1,000-yard running backs this season?
That's a great question, and they have 2 guys. I think they have the capability to do it, but would they get enough chances to both eclipse a very big number? That's a good question, but it is Fan Mail Friday, getting into the biggest Charger fan questions that you guys have for us, so thank you to everyone who hit us up to contribute on today's show, and we're starting with what I saw circulating around on social media on Thursday, which was that Kris Rhim said something you don't see a lot of people saying, especially at a very optimistic time where I think everyone's record predictions and things like that might skew a little positive because for the most part, everyone's healthy, right? You're full of optimism. You have a bunch of draft picks that you believe are going to pan out to a certain extent before ever seeing him hit the field. But this is what he said when talking about the Chargers potentially not getting to 10 wins on an ESPN Plus article. He said, it was a bold prediction. I will also say that, but he said the Chargers won't win double-digit games. Of the Chargers' 11 wins last season, just 3 came over teams with a winning record, with 2 wins over the Broncos and 1 over Cincinnati. LA benefited from a mightily easy schedule, the NFL's 5th easiest schedule in 2024, and beat up on some of the league's worst teams in Jim Harbaugh's first season. With a much harder schedule and the Chargers roster not much improved from last season, it'll be an uphill battle for this team to hit double-digit wins in 2025. The schedule is much tougher. I totally understand that part of it, but I think the part you took major exception with is that the team didn't improve a lot in the offseason.
That's 100% correct. I think that is a pretty insane statement to me. So when you look at what the Chargers were able to accomplish this offseason, major improvement in the wide receiver room. It's not just Lab McConkey anymore. You have, several guys in there that can go out there and make plays and beat man coverage and go up there and get the football, whether it's Mike Williams or KLS or Trey Harris. You have several other guys that you can go to. The tight end room is vastly improved with Tyler Conklin and Aronde Gadsden II being huge upgrades over anything that Hayden Hurst produced, which was nothing, and Stone Smart. I think the floor of that room and the ceiling of that room has both been improved by those arrivals. Also, the offensive line, it has gotten better with the addition of Mekhi Becton. It's not all the improvements that everybody wanted, but it's still absolutely better than it was last year. The running back room, the Chargers wanted to be a running offense. They didn't really have the right players in place to be able to do that. Now they do when they have Omarion, Hampton, and of course Najee Harris. And then the defense is mostly intact. You lost Puna Ford, but they added several different guys on that defensive line to try to replace that production, whether it's Naquan Jones or Deshaun Hand or the draft pick Jamari Caldwell.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of places that you could look that you could argue they made improvements. I think it does start with not losing much outside of Puna Ford. I think Puna Ford's a big loss. Obviously, Joey Bosa at his best would be a big loss, but he wasn't that last year, and I still think it is a loss, and I still think he was their second best edge rusher last season, but at the same time, you hope that Thule can make a step to mitigate that a little bit. I would say, Mekhi Becton, Tyler Conklin, 2 guys where you just say clear improvements. You have an actual kind of contingency plan at center, or at least competition with Andre James, who wasn't here last season. But I do think the major thing with this is just underselling what this rookie class can be, because I think we probably had similar feelings last year. And then you got 4 above average starters in that draft class. This year you had more picks. If 3 of those guys turn into above average starters this season or can be impact players for either side of the ball, and also with the additions of guys like Mekhi Becton and Tyler Conklin, hard to imagine that this team isn't improved. Now, it's a really, really tough schedule, and the Chargers did not prove that they could beat those good teams last year. They have to prove that they can do it this year, and I think they will do better. Now, do I think they're going to sweep all the good teams on their schedule? No, but I don't think they'll be nearly as bad against the really good teams. I think that will regress to the mean a little bit. But let's get to this question from John Clark, who says, for a team that has playoff aspirations like the Chargers obviously do, is it more of an advantage or a disadvantage to play a tough schedule down the stretch in preparation for a possible playoff push and then a hopeful playoff run, or is it a no factor whatsoever? I mean, to me, I like it. I mean, the first thing you want to do is make the playoffs, but I do want to know kind of what the team is going to do when they get there, and I don't think you can truly get a grasp of that unless you're seeing them play top competition in the regular season.
I hear you, but also, to be honest, it's a disadvantage, of course, to be playing the good teams down the stretch, right? Because they are going to be making it a lot more difficult for you to get to the playoffs in the first place. So obviously the path of least resistance most of the time is going to be the smartest path. But, this year there is really no, stretches in this schedule that are overwhelmingly easy. You're going to have some really hard contests, and to close out the year, you're really going to have to earn it, because there's 6, 7, 8 games that are really going to test what quality of football team that you are this season. So no matter how you want it to be, you're definitely going to have to prove it against the good ones this year, because there's 9 playoff teams on your schedule.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying as well. But I disagree, though, because we're talking about a team that's going to make a hopeful playoff run, right? Having an easy schedule gives you a better idea of if you're going to make the playoffs or not. But guess what? If you can't beat good teams, it doesn't really matter, because you're not going to be making a playoff run. Now, will those teams push you a little harder? Could you get more injured in those games just because they're more competitive or playing against better teams? Maybe there's an argument for that. But I do also think when you're looking at it, there are playoff teams like the Steelers and the Vikings that could look a lot different this year. But I do think the warning signs were there last year. And the Chargers might have gotten lulled into a false sense of security and thought they were a much better team than they were, and then ended up getting smacked in the mouth by the Texans because they didn't play a bunch of good teams last year, and they beat up on a bunch of really bad quarterbacks in bad situations last year. So for me, it is trial by fire, but show the world that you can beat the good teams. I'd rather know if the Chargers are good in the regular season and have conviction in it than just saying, hey, well, the only 2 playoff teams you beat last year were the Broncos. And what did that get them? So I do think number one is making the playoffs. And I understand that from your point of view. But I want to see them do something in the playoffs. And that's really what I'm
definitely do
more
as
about.
well. I'm with you on that.
Yeah, I mean, obviously not making the playoffs would be a disaster. Not getting 10 wins would feel like a disappointment.
Yeah.
But to me, it's much more with this team, with this head coach, with this quarterback now, not about making it to the playoffs. It's about winning games once you get there. You're going to know this season by how it goes if you're going to have a chance to do that. But before we get into the rest of these fan mails, we do have one from Athir who's looking at a different game on this schedule that he's looking forward to as a big test for the Chargers' young corners. We're going to talk about that because the Chargers, we talked about it. They have a gnarly slate of number 1 wide receivers, but Athir wants all the smoke with a guy who is arguably the best of them.
Daniel, David, this is Athir. Schedule came out. Must-see matchup for me is easy. My young corners, Cam Hart, Tyreek Still, Wilson Zeller, in prime time. I want the smoke. I want the fire. Let's go, baby. What are your thoughts? Thank you.
I would say be careful poking the bear, David. The Chargers corners are going to have plenty of tests in this season for sure.
Yeah, I mean, and much to kind of what you were saying against with the Chargers trying to kind of test their mettle against the better teams in the NFL, Tyreek Still and Cam Hart are going to be testing their mettle against one of the best receivers on the planet in Justin Jefferson. So if you really want to see if you belong, if you really want to confirm or deny if you are that lockdown corner, then you got to prove it against the best in the league. And guess what? He's definitely at the top of the mountain.
Absolutely. I mean, and also you have guys like CeeDee Lamb and Terry McLaurin and AJ Brown and Nico Collins and Malik Neighbors and DK Metcalf as well to contend with. So we're going to see what these young corners are made of. I think the nice thing with those guys too is they bring different skill sets. So Jesse Minter will have a chance to kind of match those guys up for the most advantageous matchups for them, even if they're going against top flight receivers. And they also went up against the Triple Crown winner last year in Jamar Chase. But we still have more great stuff to get into, including one fan's wondering of why so many Chargers fans don't feel like they want Justin Herbert to win. We're getting into all that and more in today's Locked On Chargers podcast. There's nothing like the NBA playoffs, the intensity, the buzzer beaters, the fans losing their minds. It's kind of the atmosphere that you must experience live, and this year's matchups are already delivering. If you want in, Gametime makes it fast and easy to get seats, even for the biggest playoff games. Prices on the app actually drop closer to tip-off, and with killer last-minute deals, panoramic seat views, and no surprise fees, Gametime is a total game changer. But when I saw the schedule release, my mind immediately went to Gametime. The NFL schedule just happened, and you better believe I'm already looking at a fall calendar and picking which games would be the best if I want to make a trip this year. And you'll find seats for as low as $100 thanks to exclusive discounts. There's always great tickets to Chargers games at great prices. But also, I've never looked for Chargers tickets and not been able to find them at Gametime, even if it's last minute when the ticket prices start to go down. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply, but again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. David, let's continue this Fan Mail Friday here because the Everydayers brought it this week, and we're excited to get into these questions that you guys had for us, including this one from Money Edu, who says, why are so many fans questioning Justin Herbert? Wouldn't it make more sense to rally behind your quarterback now that he has competent management and coaching? That's why I see winning franchises doing with their fan bases. Too many doubters in our own community. What do you think, David?
Yeah, I mean, no matter how incredibly talented, physically gifted, or brilliant that Justin Herbert clearly is, there's going to be a contingent of fans that are not going to be able to get behind him until he wins a playoff game. And it's rough, and, you know, it sucks because, you know, I've seen every single snap of Justin Herbert's career. I see the amazing things he does every single time he steps in between those numbers and straps up and plays the football game. He makes throws that no other quarterbacks can make on a, you know, weekly basis. It is truly amazing what he has been able to do so far, with one glaring outlier. And of course, that is the inability so far through 2 trips to get a playoff win under his belt. That right there, it is the next evolution of where Justin Herbert's career needs to go if he wants to continue on a upward trajectory. That's just what it needs to. That's what it needs to be. That's why the Chargers go get a Jim Harbaugh. That's why they get a Joe Ortiz, so that they can support Justin Herbert and get him all of the things that he needs to go get that. But Justin Herbert has to get it done.
At the end of the day, that's really all it comes down to. But I also think that he's a victim of his own success, because I think the talent that he has really covered up some glaring roster fraudulence, to be honest. And the fact that he's kept so many of these really bad teams that would have 4 wins with other quarterbacks and covered that up and kept them competitive and fought for playoff spots and made it to the playoffs with teams that were not playoff rosters has really kind of come back to hurt him. But I think this is also just what happens when you have expectations, right?
Yeah.
Jalen Hurts made it to a Super Bowl, arguably outplayed Patrick Mahomes in a Super Bowl before he ever actually won a Super Bowl. And what happened over the last couple of years since that first attempt at a Super Bowl win for him? His entire fan base, like, really questioned him, wanted him gone to a certain extent. Lamar Jackson was getting questioned and potentially not going to get extensions, it was talked about, after multiple MVPs. Like, this is what comes with the territory. But I also think it's dumb for fans to think you have to have a Patrick Mahomes to win the Super Bowl, or even a top 5 quarterback, which I believe Justin Herbert is. You can make an argument, you know, Jaden Daniels obviously shooting up the ranks. Matthew Stafford's right there as well. But I do think that we just saw a not top 5 quarterback in Jalen Hurts win the whole thing and win it in dominant fashion. Justin Herbert has been a victim of really bad rosters that he's drugged to the playoffs in certain years, really bad coaching that he's drugged to the playoffs in certain years. But I also do think that, hey, listen, Jim Harbaugh is here now. You don't have that excuse. You went out there in that playoff game and outmatched or not, trying to do too much or not.
Yeah.
You totally, I mean, I wanted to poop the bed. Like, that's just what it was. Like, he had his worst career game in the worst possible moment to do it. And I understand fans that are going to be a little gun shy, especially when you had someone like Phillip Rivers who was never able to get to the big dance, and we knew how good he was. But it did feel like people defended Phillip Rivers a little bit more. So I do think it could be kind of, wanting to see him put the team on his back more often, wanting to see him run and scramble for 35 yards and truck stick Tyrann Mathieu more often and kind of take the game on his own shoulders when maybe his receivers aren't getting open or guys aren't catching passes. Him kind of having more of those moments where, like, I'm going to take this game over. And I think maybe we'll see more of that this season. But it leads to a great buy or sell that we didn't get to earlier on in the week. I'm glad we have space for it today from Rob Keenan, who says, buy or sell, Justin Herbert gets a career high in rushing yards and rushing touchdowns. So I will say this, David. What if I told you that Justin Herbert actually set a career high in rushing yards last season with 306 yards with an ankle that was really two bum ankles and also a plantar fascia injury? I wouldn't have thought that before I looked it up. But do you think this year he can set those records?
Yeah, I mean, hopefully Justin Herbert doesn't have any other ailments that kind of are going to, deter him from being able to utilize one of the greatest gifts of his game that I think has been underutilized so far in his career. We know he's got the rocket arm. We know he's got, great, vision. We know he can make any throw on the football field, but we also know this guy's an incredible athlete and he has the ability to run away from people. If he sees it, he can hit those holes and he can go. And so if he's healthy, I feel like, with a Mekhi Becton up there, opening up more holes potentially, I can see him definitely setting it. So I'm going to buy it. I feel like Justin Herbert here with two good wheels and a little bit of an improved offensive line and, hopefully more of a commitment to running the football and having more success running the football will also encourage Justin Herbert to unlock that kind of other weapon of his game that I think has been in the holster a little bit too long.
Yeah, and I think it's just about how it happens. So I will buy that he will set a career high in rushing yards. I'm not going to go there with touchdowns just because you have two hammerheads that if it gets inside the 5-yard line, I don't think you should be having Justin Herbert try to have, runs there. He had 5 touchdowns in 2020 in 15 games as a rookie. Last year, he only had 2 touchdowns. So I don't think he's getting 6 rushing touchdowns this year with the running backs that they have in place, but I think 306 yards or more than that, if he's healthy, is definitely attainable. But I think the if is a big part of that because you're talking about 3 straight years of pretty significant injuries. You had the rib cartilage in 2022. You had the broken fingers, one on each hand in 2023, and you had both of his ankles getting turned in 2024. So the thing is with this always, is it worth the risk? Is it worth giving him designed runs when you know he's going to try to play through it, but he was lesser a version of himself last year when trying to do that, and you know he's going to be out there. But we know at his core, Greg Roman wants to have a running quarterback. I mean, the Chargers went and signed Trey Lance, right, to be their third quarterback. So you know it interests them, especially after, Lamar Jackson and Tyrod Taylor and Colin Kaepernick and the other guys he has. But we'll see. I think if healthy, he could definitely break that yardage, and I think he could be more aggressive with his scrambles and get a little bit better at choosing when to scramble and knowing if he has enough space to get through the line, which was a struggle last year. And I think partially because he thought he could get to places he couldn't because he wasn't 100% physically. But let's get to this one quick before we get into the last segment here, David, from Matt J, who says, what do you think Mike Dubb being back with Herbert can really do for this team besides their chemistry? What do you think, real quick?
Yeah, I just think quickly it allows them to use the wide receivers in the roles that they are originally meant to be used for, or just accentuating the skill sets in the right way. You use Quentin Johnston on those quick passes and those quick routes. You use, Mike Williams on those go down the field and go get the football and go take it away from all your defenders. It's just about using the pieces in the right way, which I think is going to, turn into a more explosive and a more diverse offense.
Yeah, this is my thing. The biggest thing to me is just bail you out ability. That's what Mike Williams brings to the table that they didn't have without him. A guy that when everyone's covered, like we saw a good amount of time with Ladd McConkey getting, double team, triple teamed at times, and the other guys struggling to get away from man coverage, was Justin Herbert had no one to throw to,
Yeah.
and he didn't really have a guy he trusted to say, hey, I'm just going to put it in the spot and hopefully you get it. Because I would say the one thing he brings back besides the chemistry is the trust. The trust that I can throw this to you, I can give you a chance at this ball, and you're not going to let it get intercepted. So I would say the bailout ability to have a guy to go through in those big downs, and a guy also who has shown you in the clutch he will come through with big moments. I mean, there's so many big time Mike Williams moments where we talk all the time about, hey, we're going to run the ball even if you know we're going to run it. Man, some of those times, like, you know we're going to throw it to Mike Williams. We're going to throw it to him anyways. And the amount of those he came down with was pretty
astounding.
Ludicrous. So
yeah.
Also, I'd say, red zone threat, multiple 9+ touchdown seasons, even though that's kind of been an up and down number for him after, a rookie season where he had 0. It's kind of, bounced around like a ping pong ball. But he has that kind of ability to be a big time red zone threat as well. But we still have more to get into, including if both of the Chargers running backs could hit 1,000 yards in 2025. We're getting into all that and more in today's Locked On Chargers podcast. David, it is Fan Mail Friday, and want to send another shout out to all of the everydayers out there for making us your first listen, and also just for contributing to today's show wherever you did, either at Locked On LAC on Twitter, on Instagram at Locked On Chargers, or we also had some YouTube post questions today as well. So thank you guys for that. If you need a second listen, make sure to check out the Locked On NFL Scouting Show with Kyle Krabs and Joe Marino as they keep you the most informed NFL fan this offseason on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts from. David, we have more really good questions, including this one from Dustin from Red Lion, who says, with knowing how much Greg Roman and Jim Harbaugh want to establish the run, Najee Harris and Omarion Hampton will both rush for 1,000+ yards this season. This was originally a buy or sell, but David, do you think this is something that could happen for two running backs, one in Najee Harris, who's done it 4 consecutive seasons, and another one in Omarion Hampton, where if you told me right now that he's not going to finish with a 1,000-yard rushing season in his career, I would say you're probably out of your mind.
Yeah, I definitely believe that he will. I feel very confident that he will be 1,000-yard rusher. I, however, do not believe it will be in his rookie season. I just don't think there's only one football, and Justin Herbert's going to throw it, 20, 25 times probably, or more, depending on the game plan, and you can only hand the ball off so many times. So, even if we're talking about 5 yards a carry, that's 200 plus carries, 200 carries to get to 1,000 yards. So there's just not enough carries to go around, in my opinion. I mean, has it been done? Yeah, Lamar Jackson and Mark Ingram did it for the Ravens in 2019. It's actually happened, I think 7 times so far in NFL history for teammates, both rushing for over 100 or both over 1,000 yards rushing. But I, however, do not believe that's going to happen this season. I just don't believe with the way the offense is set up that it's possible.
Yeah, and I mean, the Lamar Jackson one's a little bit different, right? Because that's a quarterback and a running back doing it. The one common thread there, their offensive coordinator was Greg Roman when that happened. So we have seen it happen. It's not impossible, but the last time we saw 2 running backs do it was Jonathan Stewart and D'Angelo Williams in 2009. And you're right. It's only been done 7 times in modern NFL history, at least as far back as I could go. I think it was 1972 Dolphins that had a pair. But I would say that I expect the Chargers' run game to be improved. I do not expect it to be historic. And maybe I'm wrong. But the closest a Greg Roman team has ever had, I mean, it never came close in San Francisco. The 3 years Colin Kaepernick was the quarterback there. He was second in rushing yards to Frank Gore, who was that bell cow running back from 2012 to 2014. The Ravens did have 2. Obviously, Mark Ingram and Lamar Jackson both did it. But the closest year they had running back-wise would have been Mark Ingram with 1,206 yards one season and Gus Edwards with 711 yards that same year. So could both these guys hit 700 yards? If there's something like that, maybe there's a happy medium there where I could buy into. This is not one of them, though. This is something that has just been done very, very few times. It hasn't been done by running backs in over 15 seasons. So let's get to this next one here from Charles Zelaya, who says, hey, Daniel, longtime listener and supporter of the show. I just want to get your thoughts on something. Do you think if the Zion Johnson experience at center fails and he remains the starting left guard, would any of that experience translate to him and Bradley Bozeman having better communication on the interior of the offensive line during the season? Great work on the pod. Keep it up. This is a great angle, David, and an angle, truthfully, I hadn't thought about. And I do think that, Although, I'll put this caveat on it, I still don't hope it's those same two guys running it back in the middle. So maybe this isn't a conversation we have to have.
Yeah.
But I do think that Zion Johnson working at center, even if it's not Bradley Bozeman that's next to him, if he ends up starting at left guard, should have a better idea of, what the center position is, where his help is going to come from. And also, he's going to be the guy in charge of making all the checks and picking up the blitzers and assigning guys who they should block and knowing who should block who. These are all things that feel like, yeah, man, like that does feel like even if he doesn't win the center job, that trying to play center actually could end up benefiting him.
Hey, Charles, I see you, man. I see you. That's a smart one right there. I agree completely. I think that the cross training here could really, really help Zion be able to kind of get a feel for the type of players that he's going to be going up against at the center position, be able to see, what the kind of different challenges you're going to have to navigate there, what kind of attack angles they're going to be coming at, having to set those protections, and then, having to, that understanding and taking that back to guard with knowing what your center is going to be doing next to you, I think is going to allow for you to unlock that kind of unspoken communication. That's where the best offensive lines in the NFL come to life, is when they have drilled it and they're so comfortable that they know their job, they know the job of the guys next to them, that they can communicate without speaking. And that's when you see top-notch offensive line play. So if anything, I think this is something that will absolutely help them and help him if he does go back to guard.
Yeah, either way, right? And I think this is, if you're trying to make the argument for, hey, they'll be better, even though it's the same two guys playing the same two positions they played last year, I think this would be one of the better arguments for that if you were trying to make that argument. Now, doesn't make me feel much better about having both of those guys together still, but I do think that is a true added benefit in an angle that we hadn't thought of to this point, and I think it's a really, really good, point there. But let's get to this from Rick H-Town, who says, can we see an in-season trade for help on the interior of the offensive line? David, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, the unfortunate thing here is teams don't trade good offensive linemen. It just doesn't happen. It's just one of those things, like if it was a receiver, if it was a corner, I can much more realistically see that happening. Good offensive linemen, they get paid and they stay. It's just not a trade that you see. So I'm going to say no. I don't think that's something that's a high likelihood of happening.
And I think if you go through kind of just the NFL trade deadline in years past, you're not going to see a ton of not just interior guys, but just offensive linemen in general getting traded around that time. I think if you were to see that, it would be for teams that are just quite obviously out of it, which you're not going to really know that as much at the trade deadline by the time you have to know. I would never rule anything out with Joe Ortiz. He's part of a front office that went and got, someone like Roquan Smith in the middle of the season, and he's a guy that really has made a huge impact on that Ravens defense, and he did it in the year. We've seen him make a ton of moves and never be content with where the roster's at, and I do think there will be more moves made. But last year, you're talking about guys like Eli Apple and Marcus May and Eddie Jackson, as far as just guys that were added in season and had to get some snaps. They did not make an in-season trade, but right before they traded for Taylor Heineke, they traded for Elijah Molden. I think that if there was like a big injury or something like that, maybe you would try to trade for someone else's backup. And let's be honest, I mean, with the Chargers' struggles on the interior, it's not totally out of the question that a rookie could win a job on the interior on a different team, and they have a veteran backup that could be an improvement to what the Chargers have. That being said, if you're going to make an addition, do it before training camp. Like, that's my biggest fear with this, is not that they won't potentially add someone there. It's that you're going to potentially add someone there without actually giving them the best chance to get the chemistry and work with the guys he's going to be working with. Like, if you add a guard in week 3 and just think that he's going to step in and instantly improve your team, it's just not that simple. Like, anybody you add is going to probably come with, at the very minimum, a 2 to 3 week kind of uploading process there where you can't really expect anything near what the top of their game is if they get there, right? And if it's not too late, because once the season starts, man, it's not about development. It's not about getting better at practice individually.
About winning.
It's about game planning. That's all it is. Yeah. Like the improvements, the teaching, a lot of that stuff comes in the off season. That's when you're working on things. That's when your individual kind of plan is about improving specific parts of your game. Once you're in the season, it's meetings, it's practice, it's going through drills, and it's figuring out what your opponent is going to do because it's such a week-by-week league. So those are what I would say as far as the downside of waiting to try to go get someone like that. And that's what I hope is just, I think that if they think it's a problem, just like they did with Easton Stick, they will find a way to add to it, even if it's just more different people to give a shot, But I just think that if you're doing that, when they added Taylor Heineke, when they added Elijah Molden, who at the time were both depth pieces, right? Those weren't starters. Those were depth pieces at the time. It's not going to give that player the best chance to make a big impact. And it's one of the things that Mike Elston, their new defensive line coach, talked about, just saying like, Tier Tart was added so late, he didn't have a chance to get, a lot of the stuff that these other veterans had out there. And that's why I think he's going to be a lot better this season. And I think that would be the same thing, and even honestly magnified because of the offensive line and how much of that is based on chemistry and knowing who, the guys that are next to you and how they play. So I hope they do it. I'm not going to rule it out, but I hope it's earlier rather than later. That is going to wrap things up for today's show. Make sure you guys are back with us next week as we continue to bring you all of the latest Chargers news as your team every day, the only daily Chargers podcast out there. And also next week, we will go game by game and give you a win-loss on every game of the Chargers schedule. I mean, the schedule is out. You got to go through it and tell me who's going to win and lose every game 2 months too early. It's just part of the program. But thank you to the everydayers out there, as always, for making us your first listen. To make sure you never miss the show, go subscribe or follow for free on the Locked On Chargers YouTube channel and listen wherever you get your podcasts from. You can find us every day on our Instagram at Locked On Chargers, on our Twitter at Locked On LAC, and also on our Locked On Chargers Facebook page. But thank you as well to those who called into the voicemail line at 323-524-7924. If you want to get on the show, send us the 30-second Chargers voicemail. We don't get enough of them, and it's the best way. We love hearing you guys. We love hearing your voice. We love having that old school AM radio, sports call-in show type of a feel. That's the best way to get your question on the show, and it's why Thier gets on all the time, because that man calls in twice a week at least. So if you guys want to get in, that's the best way to do it. But we will back with you guys on Monday with the latest Chargers news, maybe in addition, and getting into more schedule talk next week. But until then, guys, take it easy and go Bolts.